What happens when an old-school cowboy meets a new-school queen who refuses to bow? Clint Eastwood didn't realize he'd just lit the fuse to his own downfall until Jasmine Crockett's first sentence left his legacy in ashes. The makeup chair was quiet, but Jasmine Crockett's mind was anything but. The studio buzzed beyond the door, producers and assistants moving like worker bees around a hive they hoped would remain controlled. But Jasmine knew what she was walking into wasn't just another segment. It was a battlefield. Her reflection stared back at her, poised, calm, but burning inside. Today wasn't about appearances. It was about truth. And truth, she had learned, didn't always arrive politely. When she stepped onto the set of American Square, the lights hit her like a second sun. Rows of cameras blinked like watching eyes, and the audience, a carefully curated mix of swing voters and morning TV loyalists, sat in silent anticipation. Clint Eastwood was already in his seat, looking every bit the cinematic relic he was, stoic, square-jawed, and untouched by the decades he claimed to represent. His presence screamed permanence, legacy, unshakable values. Jasmine was the opposite: movement, disruption, a living challenge to everything he stood for. She adjusted her navy blazer, feeling the small weight of the gold vote pin on her lapel. To anyone else, it was an accessory. To her, it was defiance. She had come armed, not with bullets or bravado, but with conviction sharpened by years of being underestimated. Her palms were dry, her heartbeat steady. This wasn't fear. This was purpose. The moderator's first question floated across the table like a balloon, gentle, unthreatening. Something about federal funding. Jasmine could have answered with a rehearsed line. Instead, she sliced through the script. It's only bold if you're not struggling. Her voice was warm steel, firm, deliberate, unapologetic. A few heads turned. Clint didn't flinch, but his hand curled tighter on his knee. He had seen storms before, but this one wasn't of the kind he was used to. This storm had a name, and it wasn't going to pass quietly. Then Clint leaned forward, his voice like gravel dragged across stone. Leadership isn't about coddling, he said. This country was built on hard decisions, not handouts. His words echoed with a familiarity that felt suffocating, like the dusty lines of a script America had heard too many times. Jasmine didn't blink. She met him in the silence, measured and unafraid. Or maybe, she said, her tone cool fire, we finally remembered what compassion looks like. And in that moment, the room stopped breathing. The silence didn't end when the cameras cut to commercial. It deepened. Clint Eastwood sat motionless, his expression unreadable, like a poker player who just realized the table had changed while he wasn't looking. The audience, though primed for civility, teetered on the edge of something raw. Jasmine felt it in the air, not hostility, not admiration, but awakening. People weren't sure what they were witnessing, but they knew it mattered. Backstage, a young intern passed Jasmine a bottle of water with shaking hands. "You good?" she asked, eyes wide. Jasmine nodded, but her thoughts were louder than her body language. Was she too sharp? Had she gone too far? For years, she had walked the tightrope between speaking her truth and being palatable enough to be invited back. But today, she hadn't edited herself. And the silence from the producer's booth said everything. They didn't know whether to praise her or panic. When the cameras rolled again, Jasmine braced for the counterattack. Clint didn't disappoint. "There's strength," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "And then there's spectacle. You've got the second one down." It was meant to reduce her, to turn her clarity into noise. Jasmine smiled, not with amusement, but recognition. This was the playbook. Gaslight. Belittle, dismiss. "If speaking plainly is a spectacle," she replied, "then maybe you've just been quiet too long." The tension wasn't just between two people now. It had infected the room. Audience members shifted in their seats, some nodding, others frowning. Twitter was already aflame. Hashtags forming like flash fires. Crockett unfiltered, saw Eastwood exposed. But Jasmine wasn't watching trends. Her focus was razor sharp, not on destroying Clint, but on dismantling the idea that his voice had more value simply because it had echoed longer. And yet, under the strength, the mask of control, something. Inside, Jasmine trembled, not fear, but memory. Of all the times she'd held her tongue, of every meeting where she was the only black woman in the room, of every time her ambition was called aggression, her ideas labeled radical. She carried those moments into battle like unseen scars. And today, for the first time, she was using them as armor. When the world expects you to break, what happens when you rise instead? The next morning, Jasmine awoke not to silence, but to a storm. Her phone buzzed non-stop, notifications from journalists, activists, haters, and allies. Some hailed her as a hero, others called her an embarrassment. But the real shock came from her inbox, an emergency message from her campaign manager. DC wants you quiet. Sponsors are nervous. Think about the long game. Jasmine sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the message like it was written in another language. The long game. Wasn't that always the excuse? Stay polite, play nice, take the slow road to justice. She thought of the young girl who had messaged her the night before. I watched you with my mom. I've never seen someone like you talk. Like that on TV. You made me feel brave. Jasmine knew what the cost of silence was. But for the first time, she was being asked to weigh the cost of her voice. By noon, the political machine had spun into full gear. Headlines painted her either as a disruptor or a liability. A major news network canceled her upcoming interview, citing tone concerns. Clint's team released a statement about respectful dialogue. It was a polished PR jab, slick, sterile, and calculated to frame him as the adult in the room. But Jasmine knew better. This wasn't about respect. It was about control. Her team gathered for an emergency Zoom, faces tight with anxiety. We're at a crossroads, her chief of staff said. You can step back, issue a statement clarifying your tone, maybe even get a second sit-down with Clint. Or, you can double down, lean into this moment. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to Jasmine. She didn't speak right away. Her mind replayed every time she'd apologized for being too passionate. Every meeting she left wondering if she'd been too much. Then she breathed in deeply. If I apologize now, she said, I won't just lose the moment. I'll lose the reason I'm in this fight at all. The decision was made. She would not shrink. She would not clarify her truth to soothe the discomfort of those used to comfort. And with that, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just participating in a political moment, she was defining a movement. When the world offers you comfort in exchange for your silence, what do you choose? Peace or power? The backlash hit like an aftershock, less explosive than the initial confrontation, but deeper, more relentless. Jasmine expected noise from the usual suspects, pundits clutching pearls and commentators framing her confidence as arrogance. But what caught her off guard was the silence. Old colleagues, ones she'd mentored, defended, even dined with, suddenly stopped replying to her texts. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Donors withdrew support, citing concerns about tone. She wasn't being burned at the stake. No, it was quieter than that. It was the slow freeze of political exile. Each headline felt like a scalpel. Too emotional to lead, when strength turns to spite. A rising star's misstep. The subtext wasn't subtle. It wasn't her message they objected to. It was her existence as a woman who wouldn't shrink. She sat alone in her apartment some nights, phone face down, lights off, wondering if she'd gone too far. But then she remembered Clint's smirk, the steel in her spine when she called him out, and the way the audience had leaned in, not away. And yet, something powerful stirred beneath the surface. It started with one tweet. She said what we've all wanted to scream in boardrooms, classrooms, courtrooms. Then came hundreds, thousands. Teachers shared how they were told to smile more. Nurses wrote about being passed over for promotions they trained others to earn. Mothers, daughters, immigrants, queer youth, all spoke of moments when they were made to feel too loud, too different, too much. Jasmine had unknowingly given them language for their pain. The hashtag #NotTooMuch exploded into a movement. But the system fought back. A senior party official called her in, the kind of man who smiled without warmth and measured power in decibels. "You're brilliant, Jasmine," he began, sliding a manila folder across the table. "But we don't win by alienating the center. We need you to be palatable." That word, palatable, stung worse than any insult. It meant shrink, smooth. Your edges, wear beige. Jasmine kept her gaze steady. "You mean less black, less woman, less me," she said, voice sharp but steady. "You're polarizing," he replied flatly. Jasmine didn't flinch. "Maybe the truth should be," she said, rising. She left the folder unopened on the table. Outside, the air felt different, crisper, charged. A small crowd had gathered. Young people mostly. Some held signs. "Truth isn't polite. If she's too much, maybe we've been too little." Jasmine paused, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. Not from fear, but from recognition. They saw her, and more importantly, they saw themselves in her. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The cost of courage was real. Career uncertainty, isolation, exhaustion. But the alternative? Living small, compromising truth for comfort? That was a death of another kind. Jasmine had sparked. Something bigger than herself. And now, the only way out was through. When the world tells you to quiet down for the greater good, how do you know if it's actually for your own silencing? Jasmine had always believed change was slow, like tectonic plates shifting beneath your feet. Imperceptible until the earthquake came. But now, the ground was shaking. In the weeks following the panel, something radical began to take root. Campuses invited her to speak, not as a politician, but as a symbol of unfiltered resistance. Community centers played her viral moment before town halls. Activists whispered her name like it meant something more than just a person. It was now a verb, a call to not back down. But the fame was never what she wanted. It complicated everything. Her inbox swelled with demands. Endorse this, condemn that, meet with so-and-so. Strangers expected her to be everyone's voice, everyone's shield, everyone's savior. In private, she struggled. Am I becoming a symbol or losing myself? She asked her reflection one morning, staring at tired eyes and a heart that hadn't stopped racing since the showdown. Was this the cost of truth, becoming a vessel for people's pain while yours remained unattended? Then came the letters, not emails, not tweets, but handwritten notes from across the country. A teenage girl in Texas who'd been mocked for calling out racism in her school wrote, "When you didn't shrink, I stopped apologizing for existing." An older woman from Mississippi said, "You reminded me I'm not done fighting yet." These weren't praise, they were lifelines. Jasmine read them late at night, tracing their words with her fingers like scripture. They didn't want a savior, they wanted permission to speak louder. And she had given them that. Her closest allies changed too. Marcus, a longtime friend and grassroots organizer, told her one evening, "You're not the same, Jazz, and that's a good thing. You're becoming unshakable." She didn't answer immediately. The truth was, she still felt like trembling inside. But maybe that's what strength was, choosing to stand even when your legs screamed to run. She realized that power wasn't about having no fear. It was about using it as fuel. By the end of the month, Jasmine wasn't just in headlines, she was in hearts. And not because she had played nice, or because she had apologized for her volume, her identity, her truth. No, she was being embraced because she had stayed. Through the silence, through the shaming, through the fire. And now, something had changed, not just within her, but in the people watching. The echo of her words was no longer just sound. It was movement. If your voice becomes a mirror for the unheard, do you have the right to ever go quiet again? The applause never really stopped, but Jasmine had learned that noise could be both fuel and fog. She stood at the back of a packed auditorium at Howard University, moments before she'd be introduced, and closed her eyes. The murmurs of anticipation, the shuffle of cameras, the clinking of coffee cups, they all blended into a dull roar in her mind. It had been nearly 2 months since the Eastwood encounter, yet she was still being defined by that firestorm. She wondered, not for the first time, if she was now trapped inside her most viral moment. Backstage, her advisor handed her a revised speech, carefully filtered for political palatability. Jasmine barely glanced at it. The words on that page were fine-tuned, cautious, designed to win favor without drawing blood. But she wasn't here for safe. She was here for truth. When she stepped onto the stage, the crowd rose instantly. But instead of starting with applause lines, she paused, then said softly, "I've been thinking about legacy. Not just Clint's. Mine. Ours." The room hushed. Her voice, though calm, carried the full weight of introspection. The world saw a confrontation. I saw a mirror. The speech wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed. But it was real. She spoke about anger, how it's not the enemy, but the evidence that you've loved something deeply enough to hurt when it's threatened. She spoke about exhaustion, how it wasn't weakness, but a sign you've been carrying more than your share. And she spoke about hope, raw, unromanticized hope, the kind that survives even when it's unwelcome. She didn't end with applause bait. She ended with a confession. "I didn't come here to be liked. I came to stay honest, even when it cost me." Afterwards, she sat alone under the theater's arching lights, watching students take selfies. Beside her, quotes projected on the wall. It felt surreal, but also earned. She remembered being their age, told to smile more, speak less, wait her turn. She had followed those rules for too long. And now? Now she was writing new ones. The country was shifting. You could feel it in the headlines, in the classroom discussions, in the Thanksgiving arguments. The debate wasn't just political, it was personal. What kind of country do we want to be? One that romanticizes the past, or one that risks everything for a better future? Jasmine was no longer asking that question alone. Millions were asking it with her. When you become the voice others rise behind, can you still claim to speak only for yourself? The Capitol steps had always felt cold to Jasmine. Too many speeches, too few truths. But today was different. She stood there not as a guest, not as a rising star, but as a leader the country could no longer ignore. The crowd below wasn't just supporters. It was a tapestry of the unheard, the unseen, the underestimated. Young women in sneakers, retired union workers, immigrants waving flags that bore more than one allegiance. The sun was sharp above her, like a spotlight daring her to flinch. She didn't. The media had tried to turn her into a moment, a meme. Clint Eastwood's fall had been easy to sensationalize, but Jasmine's rise, slow, principled, deeply human, was harder to categorize. Pundits asked if she was the next Obama. She rejected that. "I'm the first me," she'd said on a podcast, her tone unapologetically firm. But now, standing on the precipice of her biggest address yet, even she felt the weight of what was coming. This was no longer about one interview, one man, or even one policy. It was about rewriting the emotional DNA of a nation raised on silence. She took a deep breath and began. Not with promises, not with platitudes, but with a story. Her mother, tired, working nights, still finding time to vote. Her grandfather, beaten in Mississippi for asking to read a newspaper. Her own fear as a young girl in debate club told her voice was too much. She told these truths not for applause, but because legacy must be earned with vulnerability. "We do not rise by forgetting who we are," she said, her voice cracking. "We rise when we refuse to be erased." And then came the line the world would never forget. Justice is not polite. Progress is not patient. And freedom? Freedom doesn't ask for permission. The silence afterward was sacred. A moment suspended in history. People cried, not because she was perfect, but because she reminded them they didn't have to be, either. Even Clint Eastwood, watching from a distant ranch in Carmel, turned off the television and whispered, "She was right." That wasn't surrender, that was evolution. In the weeks that followed, classrooms changed. Boardrooms did too. Not overnight, not easily, but with intention. Jasmine's name wasn't just in headlines. It was in textbooks, murals, and lullabies sung by mothers to daughters who now knew that power didn't have to roar to be unstoppable. So, now the real question lingers. Are we living in Jasmine's America yet, or are we still building it, one unshaken voice at a time?